Okay, let me get started. This is a lecture possibly over all of the Oresteia, the three plays by Aeschylus dealing with Agamemnon, the libation bearers, and the Eumenides. It will at least be over Agamemnon, I would say, and the libation bearers. A little bit, libation bearers, excuse me. A little bit of background to begin with. Aeschylus is the first of the ancient Greek tragedians that we really read anymore. He is the first of the writers of tragedy to introduce a second character in addition to the main character in the chorus. That is, the chorus is not considered to be one of the characters per se. And what that does by introducing that second character is it allows for one, obviously a lot more dialogue, but it allows for the level of the drama or the suspense, if you want, to increase. Now, the material that Aeschylus is writing about and portraying is not new to him. It's mythic material. So it goes back to, at the very least, the Homerian times, because as you will see when we get into Homer's Odyssey, characters from the Oresteia are referred to. In fact, that's one of the reasons, that's the main reason why we began with Aeschylus, so that when we get to the passages in the Odyssey that deal with Agamemnon in Hades and such, that will be, better understood. Okay. One thing to consider when looking at these three plays in toto, that is taken as a whole, is that they form really, or ultimately, they form what's called a comedy. Individually, each play is a tragedy. And what I mean by that is, individually, you have each play focused around a single main character, and that main character undergoes some kind of suffering, and that suffering kind of shows to some extent what it means to be human, and also is ennobling. That is, it brings out the better, deeper qualities in that individual. That's not able to be seen as much in Agamemnon, because we see Agamemnon relatively briefly. It is seen in the libation bearers and in the Eumenides, because Orestes figures prominently in both of those, and we see Orestes' suffering and how it essentially, or kind of, if you want, makes him a better person. Comedy is different. Well, let me back up. Tragedy begins with, and I'll just do it right now. Tragedy begins, as you'll see in this slide, let me scroll down. Tragedy can be represented with a pyramid. So think of this pyramid on the left-hand side that begins with the conflict, that is, something happens that creates conflict, and then in the rising action, the movement of the play up to the climax, you have a series of complications, you have background information brought forth and such, and the climax of the play is often where there is a turn, a reversal, and the turn and reversal are also usually, not all the time, but they're usually where the tragic hero, the tragic character, has a moment of what's called an Agnerosis, or recognition. That's when he or she realizes, oops, that he or she has done something that previously they've been saying they're not responsible for, or that somebody else is responsible for. Okay? When Aristotle talked about this, the example that he used is the plays by Sophocles, particularly Oedipus the King. He praised Oedipus the King as the greatest example of tragedy, and we'll talk about that when we get to that. So once that climax or reversal happens, then you get the falling action and the resolution or denouement of the play. The conflict is between, often, the tragic hero and maybe himself or herself, tragic hero and society, tragic hero and another person. What usually causes the conflict, according to Aristotle again, was this word called hamartia. It's a Greek word, hamartia. In the New Testament, when the word hamartia is used, it gets translated into English as sin. So it is what many translators of Aristotle have called the tragic hero's fatal flaw. That is, it is some fault in the character's character. It is personal, or her personal makeup, that causes him or her to make a decision and then act. And we find out later that the decision was flawed, okay? So that's tragedy in a nutshell. We'll talk about tragedy more when we talk about Sophocles and such. Comedy, however, also begins with conflict, but rather than a rising action, you have a falling action. That is, things get progressively worse, just like they do in tragedy. But the climax or turn occurs when there is a reversal of sorts, and the rising action is leading now to a restoration of society rather than the destruction of the tragic hero. Typically, with the turn or climax in tragedy, that leads to the downfall and the destruction of the tragic hero, okay? Most tragedies, think Shakespeare's Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, and such, they end with the death of the tragic hero. Agamemnon ends with Agamemnon's death. In a comedy, the conflict that begins kind of ruptures society. It's tearing society apart. And if it continues on, society will in fact be destroyed. So when you get that climax and you get that turn, what happens at the conclusion of a comedy is society is restored. That is, the rupture is repaired. So if you think, for example, many of Shakespeare's comedies, especially the romantic comedies, the rupture is often between a father and daughter, parents and a child, maybe between a man and a woman, a lover and his beloved, etc. And they go at it and things get really bad. And at the climax or the turn, it then turns around, and what we get at the conclusion of the play, of that kind of play, is, and they all lived happily ever after. The lovers are restored, the parents are restored with their children, not usually, totally to the parents' satisfaction, but society does not end up destroyed. Often in a tragedy, society in a sense is destroyed, or at the very least, the person who has ruptured society is destroyed and society is lessened because of that person's loss, okay? Now I just suggested that the Oresteia ultimately is a comedy. You can look at the Oresteia kind of as, in a macro sense, as a comedy in three major acts. Agamemnon is the first act, Libation Bearers is the second act, and the Eumenides is the third act. And it's in the Libation Bearers that you essentially get that climax, get that turn when Orestes flees to Athens, to Pallas Athena's symbol. And then in the final act, in the Eumenides, we get society ultimately restored, and we'll talk about that as we go on. One thing as we go through these, and there are going to be times when I'm going to point out very specific passages and talk about them, but I'm also going to make a couple of references to very current events, because there are some things that are discussed in these plays that apply to what is happening in the country right now in terms of demands for justice, social justice, things like that, because there are ideas at work in the plays that we see also at work in our society right now. And I'll talk about those when we get to them. Let's see here. So, in order to really understand these plays, you got to get the background, the mental background. So, Agamemnon, who is Agamemnon? Okay. Agamemnon was the leader of the Greek forces, or the Achaean forces, if you want, that led the 1,000 ships, so to speak, to Troy, to destroy Troy and bring back Helen, who was Menelaus, Agamemnon's brother's wife. See, according to the myth, Paris of Troy came and stayed with Menelaus at Sparta. Menelaus was the king of Sparta. Came and stayed with Menelaus, and then when he left, Helen went off with him. Now, sometimes it's described as Helen was abducted or Helen was kidnapped. The Greek sources really make it pretty clear she went willingly. Okay? She was not she was not forcefully abducted. She freely went with with Paris. So Menelaus goes to his brother Agamemnon, and Agamemnon raises an army to go to Troy, to bring Helen back and to destroy the city of Troy, the kingdom of Troy. That event, that assault, takes 10 years. Okay? They get there and they are essentially camped outside the walls of Troy for about 9.5 years. There are little skirmishes, but it's a total draw until Achilles gets involved, and you can read the Iliad to find out about that. So Troy gets destroyed, and the Greek sailors that are still alive scatter and disperse to head back home. Odysseus, we'll find out in the Odyssey what happens to him. Agamemnon makes his way back. That is where the play Agamemnon opens, okay? As he's coming back, and we get the bonfires, the signal fires lit, indicating, Troy has fallen and Agamemnon will be returning and such. So let me get back to who is Agamemnon, because we keep hearing throughout the plays about this curse in the race, this curse in the family, that the family is damned, essentially. Well, why is that? Well, you got to go back to Agamemnon's great-grandfather, okay? So here's Agamemnon. His father's name is Atreus. Agamemnon and Menelaus, his brother, are called the Atreidae, or the Atreidae. That means sons of Atreus, okay? Atreus is the son of Pelops, and Pelops is the son of Tantalus. So Agamemnon is the grandson of Pelops and the great-grandson of Tantalus. Okay, so who's Tantalus? This goes back, obviously much earlier in time. Well, according to the myth, Tantalus murdered his son, Pelops, all right? And he tried to feed him to the gods. But the gods were aware of what he was doing, and they didn't eat him. They restored Pelops to life, and there's a little problem with the myth there, because we're going to be told in, I believe it's the Eumenides, that no one can bring someone who's dead, someone who's really dead, back to life. That not even Zeus can do that. And yet here we're told that the gods bring Pelops back to life. So they bring Pelops back to life, and they condemn Tantalus to Hades. It's the myth of Tantalus and Hades that we derive the word tantalize from. So according to the myth, Tantalus was placed in a river in Hades. I think it was Acheron or something, was placed in a river in Hades with his arms bound, and just above his head, out of reach, was a fruit tree with fruit hanging down, okay? And the water in the river would rise, and he would rise up, and the tree branches would lift up so that he could almost reach him, but not quite. But he also, while being in the river, so he couldn't eat, but he was also thirsty. Keep in mind, he's in Hades, so he's dead, but he still suffers, as it were, bodily passions such as hunger and thirst. So he's in the river, the water rises up, he tries to put his head down to drink the water, and the water recedes. So he can't eat, he can't drink, and that's forever. So something that is tantalizing is something that you really want, but it's just out of your reach, okay? So Pelops. Pelops has two children, Atreus, the elder, and Thyestes, all right? So Thyestes wants to take Atreus's place. He wants to be king instead of Atreus. So Thyestes seduces Atreus's wife. He sleeps with her. Atreus finds out, okay? And he takes Thyestes' two eldest children, their young children, and he kills them. And he chops them up into bits, and he invites his brother, whom he has banished, back to the kingdom, and he feeds his stewed, chopped up children to him in a meal. Okay? The third child, Aegisthus, is not there at that time. He's born, he's not obviously one of those cooked and served. Thyestes eats his children, and then he's made aware of what Atreus has done. Okay? So he pronounces a curse on the house of Atreus. This curse on the house of Atreus is referred to throughout ancient Greek literature. It's mentioned, if I remember correctly, it's mentioned in the plays by Sophocles. It's mentioned in Plato. It's mentioned in Socrates. In the plays by Sophocles, it's mentioned in Plato. It's mentioned in Socrates. It's mentioned in the Odyssey. And bear in mind, the Odyssey is written bare minimum, probably at least 200 years before these plays by Aeschylus, possibly as many as 300 years. But it's recounting a time, if you were to think of chronological time, it's recounting a time probably at least, in terms of when these plays are written, 700, 800 years previously, okay? The Trojan War is probably, if there was a real Trojan War, it's probably around 1200 BC or so, okay? So Thyestes utters this curse on Atreus, and the curse kind of sticks, right? So back to Agamemnon. So here's Agamemnon with his brother Menelaus. He marries Helen, okay? Agamemnon marries Clytemnestra. In many versions, and your introduction to Aeschylus mentions this, her name is Clytemnestra. So I will probably accidentally, because I'm used to the Clytemnestra spelling, so I'll refer probably to both versions. Well, Agamemnon and Clytemnestra have three children, Iphigenia, Electra, and Orestes. Orestes is the youngest. He has two elder sisters, okay? Before the opening of Agamemnon, and before the Greek soldiers, sailors, even go off to fight the Trojan War, they have to set sail. Well, before they can set sail from Argos, which is Agamemnon's kingdom, they have to receive a favorable wind, okay? But they can't. And I think a seer or prophet comes and tells Agamemnon that in order to receive a favorable wind, he has to sacrifice his eldest daughter. Obviously, he doesn't want to do that. Obviously, she doesn't want him to do that. And obviously, his wife doesn't want him to do it. And so he kind of hems and haws and delays until finally it's clear he's not going to get a favorable wind until he does this. So he does. Now, in some versions, and I think your introduction mentions this, if not, it's in an introduction to another edition I've been using to prepare. In some versions of the play and story, I think it might be Athena. Anyways, one of the gods comes and steals Iphigenia away and replaces her at the moment of sacrifice with a deer, okay? People aren't aware, they think it's still Iphigenia, but it's a deer, so she's not actually sacrificed. In some versions, in the Oresteia by Aeschylus, it's assumed in kind of asserted, not ever categorically, that Iphigenia has been killed, okay? So Agamemnon then goes off to lead the troops to war, okay? His two children are then sent away by Agamemnon's wife and their mother, Clytemnestra. All right. She, while Agamemnon is away, she links up with Aegisthus, Thyestes' one surviving son. Okay? Aegisthus comes and lives in Argos, becomes Clytemnestra's lover, and for essentially 10 years, the 10 years that Agamemnon is away, they plot what they will do when he returns. And obviously what we get in the play is they plot his assassination. Aegisthus thinks that part of his reasoning is that this is part of his father's curse on Atreus and all of Atreus's offspring, or all of Atreus's lineal descendants. So one of the things that you see throughout these three plays is, or one of the issues or themes being examined is justice. What is justice? How is justice performed? How is justice executed? And you'll see, according to Aegisthus, for example, in Clytemnestra, justice is revenge. Justice is vengeance. Justice is an eye for an eye. Or what I heard the other day on a film clip of a guy in Kenosha, Wisconsin, talking about the troubles there, the unrest there, if you want. He was talking about, cops and such, and he made the comment, how about when you kill one of ours, we kill one of yours? All right. So what is that? That's eye for an eye. That's, if you poke my eye out, I'm going to poke your eye out. If you kill one of my people, I'm going to kill one of your people. And one of the things Aeschylus is asking in these plays is that justice? And when I say justice, I mean, is it kind of universally right? Is it appropriate? Is it fair? And it's kind of interesting because he is appealing to this notion or this standard of moral rightness without there being, at the time, a quote unquote standard of moral rightness. That is, they did not appeal to the gods as the standard of moral rightness. The closest they come is they will talk about Zeus, and it's not Zeus's moral rightness, it's Zeus's power. That is, might makes right, because Zeus is the most powerful of the gods. What he says is, what he says goes. Okay? Aeschylus is raising a more difficult question. Does might make right? Does having the power give one the moral authority, or is moral authority something else? And that's a question that you're going to see the Furies are going to ask, because the Furies are going to say, Zeus and the others, you guys are all young gods. We hearken back, we listen to the older gods. That is, they're kind of saying there's something even farther back than Zeus. Right? This is a question we will see to some extent, not only in these plays, but in the plays by Sophocles. If we get to the material by Plato, we'll see in Plato, and then we will definitely see it in Boethius and St. Augustine and Dante. Okay? Probably also the Quest for the Holy Grail. Okay? So, start with Agamemnon. Look how it opens. I'm trying to see time here. So let me go back and stop the sharing. See how it opens and what the Watchman says. Now, in your translation by Green and Lattimore, and I'm going to refer back and forth between two different translations. The other one is by Richard, hold on, last name is Fagles. Can't remember, I think it's Richard Fagles, Robert Fagles. So in the Green and Lattimore translation, And I should tell you right now, I kind of feel like I owe you an apology for using this translation, because when I ordered it, I had not seen it other than some PDFs on Amazon. I did not realize there are no footnotes, there are no explanatory notes. I probably wouldn't have used it if I'd realized that, because this does need some notes. So the watchman says, I ask the gods some respite from the weariness of this watch time. Measured by years, I lie awake. Okay? Kind of wordy and kind of vague or obtuse. What Fagles translates, what Fagles says is, dear gods, set me free from all the pain. Okay? And then he explains what the pain is, the long watch I keep. Okay? Green and Lattimore, I ask the gods some respite from the weariness. So pain and weariness, two different things. I kind of like the Fagles translation better, because the idea of pain and the pain of human existence, the pain in human existence, is central to these plays and to the plays by Sophocles. Sophocles, rather interestingly, is going to make a statement at the end of Oedipus the King that is also echoed. I think I noted it in here somewhere, where he says, count no man blessed until he dies free of pain at last. Count no man blessed until he dies free of pain at last. The idea is that human life is pain, okay? Or human life is full of pain. And the only way you will be free of that pain is to be dead. So in the Fagles translation, dear God, set me free from all the pain. The pain is the watch he's kept for how long? 10 years. He's been away, Agamemnon has been away for 10 years, and the watchman is saying, and I've been watching every night for 10 years. Now, he's not watching expecting Agamemnon to come up the beach. He's watching, he's looking at the local mountainsides, knowing that bundles of wood are stacked at set distances, and that when he sees those signal fires, those beacon fires, that's the indication that Troy has fallen and Agamemnon is on his way home. Okay? So he goes on in our translation on page 22, and he says at the top of the page, line, 16 or 17, I sing only to weep again the pity of this house. No longer, as once administered in the grand way. Now let there be again redemption from distress. What's the pity of this house and the redemption from distress? Well, I think that the pity of this house and the distress, he's referring to that curse on the family of Atreus. He's recurring to the problems that have been ongoing in this specific genealogical line going back to Tantalus. It's almost like this line is cursed from the beginning, okay? So he keeps going. He sees the light in the distance. He calls it, line 27, a rumor of gladness. Bear in mind, what is a rumor? It's something you've heard, but you're not necessarily quite sure. So he sees the light and he infers that it means gladness, but he's not positive. He's not sure, okay? That's why he then says, line 31, my lord's dice cast aright are counted as my own. That is, if the gods have rolled the die well for Agamemnon, then he, the watchman, thinks that means things will go well for me. If the king's happy, the people are happy, essentially. Okay? He continues, line 33. May my king come home and I take up within this hand the hand I love. That is the king's hand. May he kneel and take his hand in his. The rest I leave to silence. That is, what happens after that? What happens after he greets Agamemnon personally? Everything that happens after that moment, he says, I'm not going to comment on. It's almost like the watchman is suggesting he's heard some things. Like, okay, the firelight signifies the rumor of gladness. Maybe he's heard other rumors, not of gladness. For an ox stands huge upon my tongue. That is, there's a lot he could say, but he's not willing to. He's unwilling to. The house itself, could it take voice, might speak aloud and plain. Now, that's pretty clear. He's talking about the house that Agamemnon, the palace, Agamemnon used to live in. He's talking about the house that somebody does live in now, not Orestes, he's been banished essentially, not Electra, she's not there either. It's Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. Everybody knows what's going on in the house. The house itself, could it take place, might speak aloud and plain. I speak to those who understand. But if they fail, I have forgotten everything. That is, if they don't understand, and they ask me for clarification, he says, I don't know what you're talking about. For those who do understand, it's kind of like he winks at them and says, get what I'm trying to communicate? So the chorus comes in. And what does the chorus do? The chorus in Greek tragedy is there pretty much to comment on the action of the play, or to comment on other dialogue, or, as is often the case, for foreshadowing, to kind of set the stage for things that are going to happen later. And we're going to skip an awful lot of the chorus here, okay? But I want to pick up with line 60 or so, right? Where the the chorus says, so drives Zeus, the great god of guests, the Atreidae, that is Agamemnon and Menelaus, against Alexander. Alexander there is Paris. That's another name for Paris. So why are they driving them against Paris? For one woman's promiscuous sake, that's Helen, Menelaus' wife, for one woman's promiscuous sake, the struggling masses, that is the armies, legs tired, knees grinding in dust, spears broken in the onset. Now notice what the chorus is saying there. Helen is promiscuous. Helen willingly went off with Paris of Troy. And because of her, thousands died. All right? But he goes on and says, Danans, that is Greeks, and Trojans, they have it alike. He's not saying, all the poor Greek soldiers who, it's saying both. The Greeks and the Trojans have all suffered alike because essentially Helen is a loose woman, okay? So he says, it goes as it goes now. And I think what he means by that is things aren't any different now. That is, people suffer because of what other people have done, right? The end will be destiny. Well, what's destiny? Another word for destiny is kind of like fate. So what will be will be. What is going to happen is kind of destined to happen. All right. So keep going. The chorus keeps talking. Top of page 24. They address Clytemnestra. She's not physically there yet. They're addressing her in absence. It's what's called an apostrophe. And they say, but you, lady, daughter of Tyndareus, Clytemnestra, our queen, what is there to be done? What new thing have you heard? That is, what have you heard? What are you preparing for? What is going to happen in the future? In persuasion of what report do you order such sacrifice? That is, she has apparently heard something, and so she orders sacrifice to be made. To all the gods of the city, the high and the deep spirits, to them of the sky and the marketplaces, the altars blaze with oblations. So the chorus is telling us all the altars of the city are full of sacrifices. She's sacrificing to the high gods, the gods in the air, Zeus, Hera, etc., to the gods of the marketplace, the gods of individual buyers and sellers. The chorus made reference to the deep spirits, that is, the spirits below the earth or in the earth. Okay. The flame goes high, etc., etc. And then the chorus says, be healer, line 99, be healer to this perplexity that grows now into darkness of thought. In other words, make clear my unclear mind. Make clear what is now unclear. While again sweet hope shining from the flames beats back the pitiless pondering of sorrow that eats my heart. So something is tearing the chorus up from the inside. And the chorus says, but there is hope, the hope that comes shining from the flames. I think the flames, one, it on its surface level, it might just be reference to the altar flames, but I think it's referring to the flames of the signal fires. That is, Agamemnon's going to come back and all will be well. Agamemnon will set things right, because the implication is things aren't right because of what Clytemnestra and Aeschylus are doing. Okay, so they keep talking. We're going to skip a bunch. Let's see. And page 26, strophe C, and the strophe and antistrophe, those are just referring, those are essentially stage directions, because what the chorus does is it moves from one side of the stage to the other. And sometimes the chorus will divide, and it'll divide into two groups, and you'll have one move from one side of the stage to the other. That's a strophe. And then it moves from that side back to the other side. That's the antistrophe. Or when one side moves from one to the other, that's strophe. And when the other group moves to the other side, that's the antistrophe, okay? So they say, line 176 in strophe C, Zeus, who guided men to think, who has laid it down, that wisdom comes alone through suffering, okay? Notice, Zeus put it in men's minds to think that wisdom comes through suffering. Now, it's not an idea unique to the ancient Greeks. Read any of the so-called wisdom literature, for example, of the Old Testament, okay? Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, the book of Job. I mean, that's what the book of Job ultimately is about. The book of Job is kind of this material. It's not this plot, but it's this problem within the Hebrew tradition. It's what is justice? How do you handle suffering? Because suffering automatically brings up the problem or the question of, is what I'm going through fair? Is it just? So Zeus has laid it down that wisdom comes through suffering. And that is one of the, therefore, because of that comment, that's one of the values of tragedy. Tragedy teaches wisdom because it teaches that suffering can bring wisdom. J.R.R. Tolkien, in his little essay titled On Fairy Stories, talks about what certain kinds of literature can do for children. By the way, he suggests in the essay that fairy stories, fantasy literature and such, isn't really for children, it's for adults, that we're the ones who need it. But he says certain kinds of story can have an effect on children that increases wisdom because it teaches them to deal with suffering and death, okay? And a lot of children, how do I put this? Most well-adjusted children who live in a well-adjusted family, okay, so there's two qualifications, get protected from suffering, okay? And what Tolkien is suggesting there is that certain kinds of literature can deepen a child's mental and psychological experience by introducing, the image of death, the figure of death, to that child to enable them to help deal with it. That, by the way, is what I argue the entire Harry Potter series is about. It's about learning how to die well. It's about learning how to deal with death, okay? So, the chorus goes on. So they're wondering what's going to happen when when Agamemnon comes back. They're talking about pain. They're talking about suffering. They're talking about wisdom. They're addressing what is justice, okay? And let's see here. Page 27, beginning with strophe D, they bring up the problem of Iphigenia and the calm winds and etc. Antistrophe D, line 205. The elder lord spoke aloud before them. My fate is angry if I disobey these, but angry if I slaughter this child. Okay, that's Agamemnon speaking. And he says, my fate is angry. What will happen to me personally will be angry. Okay, that is, the fates will not take kindly to me if I disobey these what? These gods who say, sacrifice your child in order to get a favorable wind. But then he says, but angry if I slaughter this child, the beauty of my house, with maiden bloodshed staining these fathers' hands beside the altar. Put that in modern words. What is Agamemnon really saying? He's damned if he does and damned if he doesn't. He's between the proverbial rock and a hard place. He's saying, my fate is screwed if I do what I'm ordered to do, but her fate is screwed if I do what I'm ordered to do. Okay? What of these things now goes now without disaster? Now this is Agamemnon 10 years previous to right now in the play. The chorus is telling us that before he left, he kind of said, whichever way I choose, there's not a good decision to make. There's no out here. There is no positive resolution. Either I will suffer for disobeying, or Iphigenia and I will both suffer if I obey, because she'll die and I will lose a daughter. He said, and my hands will be stained with her blood. How shall I fail my ships and lose my faith of battle? To urge the wind-changing sacrifice of maiden's blood angrily, for the wrath is great. It is right. May all be well yet. And he kind of, throws caution to the wind and says, who knows? Maybe it'll all work out. Okay? Well, isn't that like real life? I mean, how often do we know what the repercussions or consequences will be of our actions? Okay? One of the ways I define tragedy, we hear the word tragedy used all the time. It's bandied about in the press, and don't listen to the press because they don't know what words mean, first of all. They're not wordsmiths. They use words without understanding the full range of meaning. A tragedy in the Greek sense, in the sense of this play, is when a character must make a decision, but the character doesn't have all the information he or she needs to make the decision wisely. That is, the character is blind to some information, all right? And we're going to see that, again, Sophocles is the best example, because Oedipus makes some decisions, and he doesn't have all the information he needs, right? I mean, you could, if you wanted to, you could apply this to, again, to our current situation. Think of the decisions made back in March, February, by members of the federal government, from President Trump to Anthony Fauci to the head of the FDA to the head of the CDC, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay? They were making decisions beginning in January. They didn't have all the information, did they? I mean, when some of the first decisions were being made, didn't know that COVID was transmissible human to human. Okay? And then what happened? As more and more became known, recommendations changed, protocols of action changed, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, they made decisions without having all the information, which led to, many would argue in many situations, tragedies. That is, things were done that maybe shouldn't have been done, or things were left undone that should have been done. So, the chorus goes on and says in strophe E, but when he put on necessity's yoke, that is, when he accepted fate, when he did what he had to do, he changed. And from the heart, the breath came bitter and sacrilegious, utterly infidel, to warp a will now to be stopped at nothing. That is, once Agamemnon decided he would do what he was ordered essentially to do, that is, to use a phrase from Chaucer and then Shakespeare, he made a virtue of necessity. Right? He turned what he was being forced to do into something he chose to do. What does the character say that the chorus says? It says he changed. That is, he then went wholeheartedly into that. He was no longer acting out of duress. Okay? The sickening in men's minds, mad, reckless, and first cruelty brings daring. He endured then to sacrifice his daughter. So when he sacrificed his daughter, he really sacrificed her. I mean, no holds barred, right? She cried out. He didn't hear. The father prayed, called to his men to lift her with strength of hand, swept her in her robes aloft, prone above the altar, and sacrificed her. Okay? Skip over to the next page, 29. Line 250. Justice tilts her scale so that those only learn who suffer. Now there's again that idea of suffering. What have we been told? Suffering teaches wisdom. Right? Now, justice tilts her scale so that those only learn who suffer. So in order to really learn from your experience, and many would say that's the definition of wisdom, is the learning from experience, right? And the future you shall know when it has come. Well, what is the future? It isn't. There is no future. There's only now and the past, because none of us knows what the quote unquote future holds. I mean, I am literally sitting here in my room, and I could, while I'm speaking to you, have a massive heart attack and die. I don't think I will, but it's possible. It is also possible, it's happened once or twice before. There are news accounts. I could be sitting here and a meteorite could crash through my roof and kill me. Okay? It's not likely a gunman's going to burst through my doors because I'm at home and various other things. But what's the speaker getting at? The future you shall know when it has come. That is, you can't predict the future. You can't divine the future. You can't augury the future. That's why the speaker then says, before then, forget it. Don't worry about the future. Notice. Worry about now. Now, today. It is grief too soon given. All will come clear in the next dawn's sunlight. Well, what's the all? Today. Today will be clear when? Tomorrow. What do we say about hindsight? It's 2020. What does that mean about foresight? It's not 2020. You know, it's, to paraphrase St. Paul, it's seeing through a glass darkly. It's not seeing clearly, which is why, you know, predictions and such are seldom taken seriously. Interestingly, in the Greek tragedies, there is one character who shows up in a lot of Greek literature. He's even in the Odyssey, and he's the blind seer Tiresias. He's physically blind, but he sees perfectly. And when he foretells something, when he prophesies, those prophecies always come true. Always. He's like a good Old Testament prophet in that sense. See, in order to be a real prophet of God in the Old Testament, you had to always be right. Always. Which is why there's hundreds and thousands of other prophets. But they prophesy about Baal and all these other false gods, and they're wrong. Okay? Elijah and Elisha and those kinds of Jeremiah and such, when they prophesy, it always happens in the Old Testament. So all will come clear in the next dawn sunlight. That's how you know whether or not a prophet is really true and such. Okay? So Clytemnestra then enters. And she tells them, line 267, the men of Argos, that is Agamemnon's men, have taken Priam's citadel. Troy has fallen. The chorus is like, what? And she tells them again, is that not clear enough? Chorus asks for proof. Is there evidence? Okay, and she says, there must be unless a god has lied to me. The chorus asks, is it dream visions? Easy to believe you credit? Notice the chorus says, give me real hard proof. The chorus then says, have you had a vision? Have you seen something in a dream? Because in the Greek plays, those are often ridiculed and satirized. All kinds of things happen in dreams, okay? And she says, no, it's not a dream vision, all right? So what is it? She says, line 281, Hephaestus, who cast forth the shining blaze from Ida. Well, Hephaestus, the god of fire, the god of smithying, if you want, she says, he's the one who lit the first signal fire. And beacon after beacon, picking up the flare, carried it here. Ida to the Mount Ida, to the Hermaean horn of Lemnos, etc., until finally we see it here. And she's essentially saying, when Agamemnon went off, we had these signal fires set up so that when good news occurred, fires could be lit, and that's how we would know. Okay? Let's see here. So Clytemnestra goes on, page 31, says they've taken Troy this very day. That is, the fires were lit the same day the Trojan horse was taken in, And she says, line 334 and following, on page 32. And in the Trojan houses their spears have taken, they settle now, free of the open sky, the frost and dampness of the evening. See, for the previous nearly 10 full years, they were sleeping out of doors, encamped by their boats on the shore. Now, having taken Troy, they're sleeping indoors, in real beds, etc. Without sentinel set, they sleep the sleep of happiness the whole night through. Why? Because all the people of Troy are dead. And if they reverence the gods who hold the city and all the holy temples of the captured land, they the despoilers, might not be despoiled in turn. That is, if they properly reverence the gods of Troy, then they will sleep peaceful nights. Let not their passion overwhelm them. Let no lust seize on these men to violate what they must not. The run to safety and home is yet to make. That is, let them be careful. Let them watch what they do and say, because they still have to make the return voyage. They must turn the post and run the backstretch of the double course. Okay, let's keep going. I'm going to skip quite a bit. Clytemnestra goes back in, and the chorus comes out, talks more about Paris coming and what happened as a result, the going off to war. And then they say, bottom of page 35, talking about the men of Agamemnon camped outside, before the conquest of Troy, camped outside the walls, they sleep, etc., etc. And then 456, the citizens speak, or their voice is deep with hatred. The curse of the people must be paid for. There lurks for me in the hood of night terror of what may be told me. Okay? And here's where I wanted to point out. 461, the gods fail not to note those who have killed many. Right? The gods fail not to note those who have killed many. Now, put that in the positive. The gods take note. Let me rephrase that. The gods fail not to note those who have killed many. The gods take note of those who have killed many. The black furies, stalking the man fortunate but without justice, wrench back again the set of his life and drop him to darkness. Okay? The Furies are those beings, they're not goddesses. They're the offspring of Uranus and Gaia, the eldest of the gods, the kind of the elemental primeval gods, if you want. Excuse me. And it is their job to hound, ultimately, those who kill wrongly, if you want. They will say in the libation bearers and the Eumenides, it's their job also to hound the sinner. Okay, so you can almost read them as kind of a manifestation of psychological guilt. Okay, so the Black Furies stalking the man fortunate but without justice. That is, he's looked upon favorably by fortune. And I don't have that on that handout that I had. You have to understand in Greek cosmology, you've got the gods, okay? So think of the gods as being here, and you've got fate over here, okay? Fate occurs without the approval of the gods, without the will of the gods. The gods know what is fated so that they can tell humanity, which is down here, what is going to happen, all right? Between the gods and humanity down here, there's fortune. That is, fortune is almost like a sub-god, all right? And we're told here, stalking the man fortunate, that is the man who is kind of blessed in his life, but without justice. That is, but justice isn't on his side. That is, the person has achieved much, but maybe not all of it has been rightly achieved. Maybe not all of this person's actions have been just. And what do? They wrench back again the set of his life and drop him to darkness. The Furies take that person and haul him off to Hades, where he suffers eternally, okay? And Hades isn't the Christian conception of hell. Hades is just the underworld, but there's no pleasure, there's no joy. It's just essential awful darkness, okay? So they introduce there the idea of the Furies. And again, we're not even 500 lines into the first of the three plays. So the Furies get introduced. The herald comes in, and the herald talks about Agamemnon is on his way and such. Let's see, the chorus leader speaks to the herald, and the chorus leader kind of insinuates some things And the herald's kind of like, what are you talking about? Look at page 39, page 5, line 549. There were some you feared when the kings went away. That is what happened when the kings were away, right? And the chorus leader just says, so much that, as you said now, even death were grace. That is, well, you've kind of alluded to it, and death would be a grace. That is, death would be a beneficial end. So the herald's like, okay, all right, we'll deal with that. So skip a bit more. Clytemnestra comes back in. And she talks about the cry of joy and such. And then she says to the herald, page 40, line 604, take this message to the king, that is to Agamemnon. Come and with speed back to the city that longs for him, and may he find a wife within his house as true as on the day he left her, watchdog of the house, gentle to him alone, fierce to his enemies, and such a woman in all her ways as this, who has not broken the seal upon her in the length of days. Okay, that's an example of dramatic irony. That is, she is saying things that the audience understands the hidden import of, okay, that the characters within the play don't. So, may he find a wife within his house as true as on the day he left her. Well, the audience knows she wasn't true on the day he left her. The moment he killed his daughter, she turned against him. So she hasn't been true to him for 10 years. All right? With no man else have I known delight. Well, that's just a bald-faced lie, because she's been sleeping with Aeschylus for 10 years. Nor any shame of evil speech, more than I know how to temper bronze. And the herald's like, wow, this is a great boast. And it's well fitting from you and such. And the chorus leader says, thus has she spoken to you, and well you understand, words that impress interpreters whose thought is clear. Okay? And then he goes on and talks about Menelaus and such. So we're going to skip some more. And the herald leaves after he's talked a lot about a variety of things. And the chorus comes back out. In the chorus, in strophe B, page 44, introduces this, or maybe I should say reintroduces, this dark tone. Once a man fostered in his house a lion cub. This is line 716 and following. From the mother's milk torn, craving the breast given. In the first steps of its young life, mild, it played with children and delighted the old. Caught in the arm's cradle, they pampered it like a newborn child, shining-eyed and broken to the hand to stay the stress of its hunger. Next, anti-stroke B, but it grew within time, and the lion in the blood strain came out. That is, the lion did what a lion does. It repaid thanks to those who had fostered it, even though the lion started out as a cute little kitten, big, but, you know, when it grew up, it was a full-blooded wild lion who had fostered it in blood and death for the sheep flocks, a grim feast forbidden. The house reeked with blood run, nor could its people beat down the bane, that is the lion, the giant murderer's onslaught. This thing they raised in their house was blessed by God to be priest of destruction. So notice that. The thing that destroyed the house was raised in the house. What's the chorus getting at? Well, what's going on in Agamemnon's house? There's a lion there too, right? So Agamemnon comes in, page 46, with Cassandra beside him. Cassandra's a prophetess from Troy. The only problem is she's had a curse put on her that no one believes her prophecies. Her prophecies are always true, but no one ever believes them. So she can prophesy till she's blue in the face, and no one believes them until, as the chorus said, the sun shines the next day, and now we understand the day before. That is, once the things come to pass, then they accept them. But it's almost like when she then utters another prophecy, they don't believe it again. It's like they forget what has been happening. Okay? So the chorus addresses Agamemnon, line 785, page 46. How shall I hail you? How give honor, not shooting too high, this is going to be really important, nor yet bending short of this moment's fitness. For many among men are they who set high the show of honor, yet violate justice. The chorus is saying, how can we praise you in a manner that is fitting for you, but doesn't impinge or touch on or approach the glory of the gods, or the praise that is only due to the gods? In other words, Agamemnon, you're the mightiest, greatest man to be praised, and we want to praise you with the highest language we can, but we don't want the gods to be jealous of our praise of you. Right? One of the reasons for Paris taking off, Helen of Troy and such was the other myth involving Paris and the three beautiful goddesses, and who's the most beautiful, et cetera, et cetera. Well, go look up the myth. I mean, when he says Helen is the most beautiful, not the three goddesses, when he says Helen is the most beautiful and more beautiful than Aphrodite, for example, and Hera, goddess of love and queen of the goddesses, they got jealous. They got very jealous. Okay, that's what kind of led to his then taking off Helen in the Trojan War and the whole 9 yards. So the chorus here wants to find words to praise Agamemnon appropriately, but they don't want to ascribe the praise that should only go to the gods. Because in Greek literature, when somebody assumes the place of a god or the gods, or somebody says he is worthy of prayer like the gods are, that person will be cut down. That person will be knocked down to size, because you never affront the gods in that way. That's an example of hubris, spelled either Hybris or Hubris, which is overweening pride or great arrogance. All right. Now we're going to see something else that's going to touch on this very same notion in just a couple of pages, when Clytemnestra comes out and approaches Agamemnon and invites him down from his chariot to step on not the bare ground. Okay. So they go on, buttering up Agamemnon and such, and Agamemnon thanks the city and thanks the gods for helping him home and such. And then he says, page 48, line 832, in few men is it part of nature to respect a friend's prosperity without begrudging him. All right? As envy's wicked poison settling to the heart piles up the pain in one sick with unhappiness, who staggered under sufferings that are all his own, winces again to the vision of a neighbor's bliss. So why does he say that? In few men is it part of nature to respect a friend's prosperity without begrudging him. What's he saying? He's saying there are few men in the world who can look at another person, another friend, who's doing really well and not be envious. And what happens? When envy's wicked poison settles to the heart and does what? It piles up the pain in one sick with unhappiness. That is, the envious person looks at the other person's blessings, the other person's fortunes, and it creates pain. And because he's unhappy, that pain grows. And he staggers under sufferings that are all his own. In other words, Agamemnon is saying the person ought to be content with what he has. He ought to be happy for his friend's good fortune. Okay? And so he says, And I can speak, for I've seen, I know it well. In other words, I've seen this exactly, what I've just been talking about. This mirror of companionship, this shadow's ghost, all those who seemed my friends in their sincerity. And he mentions Odysseus, he who sailed unwilling, once yoked to me, pulled all his weight, nor ever slacked. Okay? And then he says, and I don't know if he's still alive or not, because Agamemnon gets back long before Odysseus does. Odysseus has gone 20 years. Agamemnon's been gone only 10 years, right? So he keeps talking, and he says, now, we got to ordain a council, get the citizens, blah, 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 blah. But look, pick up with 851. So to the king's house and the home about the hearth, I take my way. Notice, to the king's house, we move from larger to smaller. From the king's house, think of the castle behind me, okay? King's house, okay? To what? And the home. So the castle would be the whole house. The home would be the central part. And what's the innermost? The hearth. Why the hearth? It's the place of warmth. It's the place of cooking. It's the place of conviviality, that is sitting around drinking, having fun, talking, sharing stories, right? The kitchen, as it were. He says, I take my way. Why? He's been gone for 10 years. All he wants is to go home. He just wants to go home. The entire Odyssey, minus the first 4 books in a sense, is all about one thing. Odysseus wants to go home. He wants to see his wife. He wants to sleep in his own bed, period. Okay? So Clytemnestra shows up. She addresses Agamemnon. She talks about how Orestes isn't there that day, lines 875 and following. That he's been sent off to a person to be fostered. Okay. She says, 881 and following, I sent him there because there was some kind of prophecy or allusion to there would be evil to him, right? When, she's actually the revolution, the danger to him. And then turn to page 50. So she's still speaking to Agamemnon. In line 905, Agamemnon's in the chariot still. He hasn't stepped foot outside. And she says, now, my beloved one, step from your chariot. Step down from your chariot. Yet let not your foot, my lord, sacker of Ilium, destroyer of Troy, touch the earth. Well, how's he supposed to step down if he's not going to touch the earth? He's not like Hermes, the messenger god who has the winged boots. Okay. Let not your foot, my lord, touch the earth. My maiden's there, so she calls her maidens. Why this delay? Your task has been appointed you to strew the ground before his feet with tapestries. Let there spring up into the house he never hoped to see, where justice leads him a crimson path. So what's the crimson path? What phrase do we use today when there's a big shindig going on, a big party full of powerful, famous people, entertainment types, think of the Oscars. And the quote unquote stars get out of their limos, and what do for all the photographers and paparazzi? They walk the red carpet. Why? The red carpet is symbolic of divinity. It's symbolic of being above the ordinary pale of humanity. All right? So she's saying, no, Agamemnon, You shouldn't walk on the bare earth. You, she's implying, are like a god. And Agamemnon knows that. He knows what she's getting at. I'm not saying or suggesting he knows that she's plotting his death, but he knows the significance of the red carpet, right? And notice, it's going to lead him all the way to the palace. That is, this red carpet is going to be unfurled. And notice, when the president, whoever the president is, when the president gets off Air Force One, there is almost always, especially if it's a major ceremonial kind of thing, like he's got an honor guard or something, there's a red carpet rolled up to these steps, right? So here's an idea. It's over 2,500 years old that we're still using today. And the vast majority of people have no idea of the significance of that. And what does she say that red carpet really does? It's where justice leads him in. Now, I think her understanding of justice is radically different than Agamemnon's, because the justice she's thinking about is what? Once he goes inside the palace, she's going to kill him, right? So Agamemnon says, daughter of Leda, you who kept my house for me, notice the implication there. It's mine, it's not yours, you just were a caretaker. There is one way your welcome matched my absence well. But then he says, you strained it to great length. That is, you went a little bit over. Too much, right? Properly to praise me thus belongs by right to other lips, not yours. That is, you shouldn't be the one praising me, it should be others. My 9:21. Let me back up. Yet properly to praise me thus belongs by right to other lips, not yours. And all this, and I think he's pointing at the red carpet. Do not try in woman's ways to make me delicate. In other words, don't tell me my feet shouldn't touch the ground. My feet have been touching the ground for the last 10 years. I've been living on the ground. Right? Nor, as if I were some Asian prince, bow down to earth and with wide mouth cry out to me. That is, don't act like I were some great mighty potentate, etc. Nor cross my path with jealousy by strewing the ground with robes. Jealousy. Whose jealousy? Don't make the gods jealous. Okay? And notice he brings up that jealousy, and what was one of his previous speeches about? The envy of the friend's prosperity. Well, that's the envy there is also jealousy. Right? So he says, he makes it categorically clear, such state befits the gods, and none beside. Such state, that is, the way you were treating me, the asking me to walk on the red carpet, that's appropriate only for the gods, and none beside, that is, and none other. If I were Athena, yeah, you roll out the red carpet. If I were Zeus, yes, you roll out the red carpet. If I were Ares, if I were any other god, even a minor god, yes, you roll out the red carpet. I think he would probably even say, if I were Achilles, why? Because Achilles' mother was a goddess. Then you roll out, because he's a demigod. Then you roll out the red carpet. I am a mortal, a man. I cannot trample upon these tinted splendors without fear thrown in my path. That is, if I take one step down there, then the very next step, that's fearful. Because he knows what that implies. He knows if any of the gods are aware, and the gods are aware of what humans do, that when the gods see this, they're going to go, oh, we're going to have to take down Agamemnon. Look what he's done. I tell you, as a man, not God, to reverence me. So notice, yes, it's appropriate to reverence me. but just as a man. Don't ascribe honors to me that are appropriate, only to the gods. Because he knows what's going to happen. He knows. If you ascribe those honors to me, the gods will cut me down. Especially if the gods think he believes that he's deserving of those honors. Okay? Discordant is the murmur at such treading down of lovely things. And I think that's implying the idea of murmur, that there are people all around and they're going, oh no, he's not going to do it. He's not going to step on the red carpet. That's going to bring destruction. While God's most lordly gift to man is decency of mind. Decency of mind means decorum, appropriateness. This isn't right. Call that, and here's the echo of Sophocles later, because this is written long before Sophocles writes his Oedipus the King. Call that man only blessed who has in sweet tranquility brought his life to close. Now, the slight difference between this and Sophocles' line is count that man blessed, or count no man blessed till he is dead, free of pain at last. Agamemnon says, call that man only blessed who has in sweet tranquility, that is, who has in perfect peace died, who's died in joy, died in happiness. But notice it's one, dead, but the death comes in peace, okay? In the Orthodox Christian Church, I'm Orthodox Christian, when someone dies or someone is preparing for death, we pray for a death that is painless, blameless, and peaceful, not a death that is crying out, kicking, and screaming. Agamemnon says, you can only count someone blessed who has died in peace. He knows if he does what she's asking him to do, he won't die in peace. Okay? If I could only act as such, my hope is good. He's saying, if I could only die this way, I would have good hope. And so she says, yeah, tell me this one thing and do not cross my will. Don't go against me. Don't challenge me, she is saying. Now bear in mind, ancient Greek society, what kind of role did women have? What place did they have in society? Even the queen? None, really. They were property. They had no vote. Once the Senate was set up, women had no say. They had no property rights, per se. Right? They were not citizens. So when she says, do not cross my will, I mean, that's kind of a gutsy move there on Clytemnestra's part. Agamemnon, my will is mine, I shall not make it soft for you. That is, I will do what I will do, and I'm not going to listen to what you have to say. I am not going to bend my will. And bear in mind what that means. Bend means here's his will. It's upright. It's hard. It's resolute. He says, I'm not going to bend, which means what? Bow down to you. Okay? She says, might you in fear have done such things for God? Only if the one who advised me so knew the full purpose. The one who advised me is talking about a prophet. Only if the prophet knew the full reason. Clytemnestra, if Priam had won as you have, what would he have done? That is, if Priam had come here, conquered Argos, and gone back to his wife, Hecuba, what would he have done? And Agamemnon says, I think he would have walked on tapestries. I think he would have done it. But what he's doing there is he's talking about the difference between himself and Priam. Because bear in mind, he's alive, Priam's not. And Agamemnon's kind of implying that's one of the reasons why Priam is now dead. So Clytemnestra says, be not ashamed before the criticism of men. Be not ashamed. Well, what's the criticism of men? He has already alluded to, top of the page, the murmur. And then he responds to her comment about criticism of men. The people murmur, and their voice is great in strength. That is, it's not just one or two people out there murmuring. It's like this loud. Don't do it. Don't walk on the carpet. They're not yelling because it's murmur. Murmur is always under the breath. Sorry, you really shouldn't do that. It's going to be a real problem. Yet he who goes unenvied shall not be admired. Well, he talked about envy earlier, right? About the person who envies his friend's great fortune. He's not talking positively there. She is saying, yeah, but the only reason people admire others is because they envy them. They wish they were in their shoes. Is that true? Do you really only admire people that you want to be exactly like? Or can you look up to somebody and go, man, what a good person? But not necessarily want to live in that person's shoes. Agamemnon. Surely this lust for conflict is not womanlike. You say, why do you desire to push me? Why do you desire to cross me? Come on. This isn't womanlike. This isn't ladylike. This isn't feminine. Yet for the mighty even to give way is grace. That is, you're mighty, and to give in of your will, she says, is a grace to me. Does such a victory as this mean so much? Is this really so important to you? Okay, keep in mind, he's been there for however long, a few minutes, after 10 years away, he's still standing in his chariot. And he's like, really? This is what you want to push me on when I first get back? Is this really so important to you? He's trying to figure out why. Yield. The power is yours. Freely give way to me. All right? Come on. Just do it. Just do it. It's almost like, another story. Come on. The apple tastes good. I took a bite. I'm fine. Take a bite. You'll like it. Agamemnon. Since you must have it, here let someone with all speed take off these sandals, slaves, for my feet to tread upon. In other words, okay, I'll do it. Remember what was said about when he sacrificed his daughter. Once he made the decision, he did what? He went at it full bore. Here, once he makes the decision, he's not just going to walk on the red carpet on his sandals, because bear in mind, if he walks on his sandals, his flesh isn't literally touching the red carpet. There's something between it. No. He's going to put bare feet on that red carpet. Okay? Kind of implying he's going all the way on this. And as I crush these garments, the tapestries, the carpet, stained from the rich sea, let no God's eyes of hatred strike me from afar. So it's kind of like he goes, don't look at me, gods. You don't see what I'm doing as I am crushing these carpets that are only meant for the gods. Great the extravagance and great the shame I feel to spoil such treasure and such silver's worth of weaving. That is, this thing was ungodly expensive to make. Okay? And by treading on it, he's essentially saying it's ruined. In other words, you can't roll this carpet out for the gods now, right? Because somebody else has already trampled it. 906. Excuse me, 956. Now, since my will was bent to listen to you in this, my feet crush crimson as I pass within the hall. So the crimson carpet runs all the way into the palace. So his feet are walking in this blood red carpet. Symbolic of what? The symbolic blood that will soon be flowing from the palace. He's walking to his death, unbeknownst to him. Okay? So he goes in, and the chorus says, why must this persistent fear beat its wings so ceaselessly and so close against my mantic heart? The chorus says, something's not right. My heart tells me something's going to happen. Why this strain, unwanted, unrepaid, thus prophetic? I don't want these ideas. They must not be my own. They're coming from somewhere else. Okay? So there's this sense of foreboding. They keep talking. Top of the next page, 54. 1005. The chorus says, man's fate that sets a true course may strike upon the blind and sudden reefs of disaster. Man's, notice, it's fate that sets his course. But here it's a true course. True there means it's right, it's straight, it's going to reach its destination. But that course can still strike on what? Blind, hidden reefs. There might be something out there that he's not aware of. Okay? So now Clytemnestra comes out, and she calls Cassandra and sends Cassandra into the palace and tells Cassandra, line 1046, from us you shall have all you have the right to ask. From us, you'll get what you have the right to receive, in other words. Okay? So Clytemnestra leaves, and the chorus leader and Cassandra are left outside, and they talk. And Cassandra cries out to Apollo. And the chorus is like, why? You line 1074. You cry on Loxias, another name for Apollo. He's not the one who usually has to do with grief. And she says the same thing. Shame upon the earth, Apollo, Apollo. Right? And she starts to kind of obliquely prophesy. Line 1090. Okay? A house that God hates, guilty within of kindred bloodshed, a torture of its own, the shambles for men's butchery, the dripping floor. Well, what is the house that the God hates? Back up 2 lines. The house of the Atreidae. If you understand not that, I can tell you. Okay? Because she had asked, what house is this? And so chorus leader says, oh, this is the house of the Atreidae, the sons of Atreus. Oh, no, not that house, the house the God hates. Why? Well, what did Atreus do? Killed his brothers, 2 of his brother's sons, fed them to his brother. That's why it's guilty within of kindred bloodshed, torture of its own, Agamemnon sacrificing his daughter, the shambles for men's butchery, the dripping. She's saying, this whole place is damned. Okay? 1096. She's still prophesying. Now, bear in mind, prophesying doesn't only have to refer to speaking the truth about something that is going to happen in the future. It can be seeing something that has happened in the past that the person really should have no knowledge of. The small children wail for their own death. That's Thyestes, 2 children. and the flesh roasted that their father fed upon. That's their flesh fed to their father Thyestes. But I don't think that Cassandra heard about that in Priam's house over in Troy. In other words, she is being given this knowledge. Okay? So they keep talking. 1107, she says at the bottom of page 57. So cruel then that you can do this thing? She's not speaking to the chorus leader. She's talking obliquely to or about Clytemnestra. The husband of your own bed to bathe bright with water, how shall I speak thee in? Well, that doesn't sound bad. Clytemnestra is going to give her husband a bath. However, she's going to do more than that. Okay? Chorus leader, I don't know what she's talking about. I'm bewildered in the midst of prophecies. Okay? 11:15, is it some net of death? Cassandra is seeing with her mind's / prophetic eye. Or is the trap the woman there, the murderess? Let now the slakeless fury in the race rear up to howl aloud over this monstrous death. What is the slakeless fury in the race? Slakeless means it cannot be appeased. It cannot be slaked. It cannot be satiated or sated, all right? It cannot be satisfied. There is something in this race, meaning this lineal family from Tantalus on down, that causes seemingly each generation to do something horrible within that generation. Okay? So she continues prophesying, 11:25 and following, talks about the folded web's entanglement. That is, it's like there's this giant web over the entire house. Okay, and this is, Agamemnon is now the spy in this, the spider in the fly in the spider Clytemnestra's web. And she sees Agamemnon, again, with her prophetic eye, she sees Agamemnon going into the bath, and Clytemnestra puts this garment, this web around him, and kind of gets his arms pinioned, and then she stabs him. And he crumples in the watered bath, 11:28. Guile, I tell you, and death there in the cauldron rot. The chorus then says, from divination, what good ever has come to men? From divination, from prophesying, from foretelling the future, what good ever has come? And what the chorus really means there is, who's ever been right? You fortune tellers, you prophesiers, you're wrong half the time. Art and multiplication of words drifted through tangled evil bring terror to them that hear. Tangled evil. The implication is you spout off so many different possibilities, you one or two are bound to be right. And what does it do? It creates fear in the mind. Okay? Cassandra keeps going. The chorus says, you are possessed of God, inspired at heart. The inspired at heart, what does it really mean? It means the English word enthused, E-N-T-H-U-S-E-D. Because what does that mean? Well, what does inspire mean? In, within, spiro, to breathe in. But the enthused, the in means in. The thus comes from theos, God, which is the Greek form for the name Zeus, God. It means to be engodded, to have the God fill you. So when you are enthused by something, you are filled with God or the gods, etc. Right? So you are possessed of God, inspired at heart, to sing your own death song, etc., etc. All right? So they keep talking. And Cassandra, top of page 61, talks about Thyestes, spit curses on that man who spoiled his brother's bed. He slept with Atreus' wife, which is why Atreus then kills his children, right? And then she asked, did I go wide or hit like a real archer? Tell me, am I right or am I wrong? And they're like, oh, you're pretty right, right? So she goes on, page 62, and she says, look there over the house. Look above the house. That is, she's literally saying, look above the palace. See what's hovering? So small and young, images in the shadow of dreams, like children almost, killed by those most dear to them, Thyestes' children, and their hands filled with their own flesh as food to eat. She says, I see them holding out the inward. She sees the children holding out their guts. Okay. There is one that plots vengeance for this. That's not Clytemnestra. That's the young children's brother, Aegisthus. So Cassandra's, she's uncovering everything. She doesn't even know Aegisthus is there. All right? One that plots vengeance for this, the strengthless lion rolling in his master's bed. That is, strengthless lion. He's like a young whelp. He's a mere boy, according to Cassandra. I don't mean he's literally 9 or 10 years old. He's an adult male, but he's not a warrior like Agamemnon is, okay? Rolling in his master's bed, who keeps the house against his lord's return, etc., etc. Right? And then she says, 1240, what is to come will come. That is about an apt description of the Greek idea of fate as there is. What is to come will come. What will be, period. You can't escape it. Then the chorus leader goes on and says, I know what she's talking about. Thyestes' feast, etc., etc. And Cassandra says, you will look on Agamemnon dead. And no, don't say that. That's too far. There is no God of healing, 1248 or so, in this story. And that's pretty bleak. She's saying nothing good's going to come of this. There's no Deus ex machina, Greek phrase that means God from the machine. When Greek plays were performed, there was a building on the stage. I'll do another drawing and show this. There's a building on the stage that could have a contraption in the ceiling so that a person could be lowered from the roof or from the ceiling. And that could be what was called the Deus ex machina, the God from the machine, the person that would come down and bring an irrational, supernatural conclusion to a play. And it was irrational and supernatural because they're in the everyday human frame of things, there was no way out of this. It would be like, the versions that I mentioned of when Iphigenia was sacrificed, where the god shows up and replaces Iphigenia with a deer. Well, here that's not what happens. Okay, so replacing Iphigenia with the deer, that's where the god from the machine would come in, wave the magic wand, and everything would be fine. Okay. They keep going. Let's see here. Page 64. I don't think we'll get through libation bearers today, so I'll do a separate one for that. Line 1278. Cassandra says, we too must die, yet die not vengeless by the gods. That is, Agamemnon and I are gonna die. Agamemnon's already dead, she's implied. But we won't be vengeless. That is, the gods will avenge our deaths. For there shall come one to avenge us also, born to slay his mother and to wreak death for his father's blood. She's already telling us about Orestes, or maybe Electra, Orestes' older sister. But there is another child from Clytemnestra who will avenge Agamemnon's, and she is suggesting her, Cassandra's, death. And that will come from the gods. The gods will sanction that. Okay? For this is a strong oath and sworn by the gods, that he shall cast them headlong, for his father felled. Again, she is a prophet of Apollo. So this is Apollo speaking through her, saying, one will avenge them, and that person will be protected, essentially. So she makes her way to the palace, and the chorus asks, how can you serene like walk to the altar like a driven ox of God? And she says, page 65, line 1298, there is no escape for any longer time. What does she mean? Why shouldn't I? It's putting off there's no putting off the inevitable, okay? Then the chorus leader says, 1303 or so, woman, be sure your heart is brave. You can endure much. There's that ennobling thing about the suffering. She endures. Notice, she goes on and meets her death with her face held high. But then notice her reply. None but the most unhappy ever hear such praise. Well, why are they the most unhappy? Because she's marching to her death. In other words, it'd be nice to have that kind of praise and know you weren't going to die for several more years. Yet there is grace on mortals who so nobly die, the chorus leader says. And that's the purpose of tragedy. To bestow, to transfer from the characters in the play to the auditors and watchers of the play, that idea, that notion of there but for the grace of God go I. That idea that I can watch and I can learn from this character, from this person. I can experience vicariously through this character what he or she is undergoing. And I can learn from that. And I can take that action and that response into myself and change the way I am. Right? C.S. Lewis said in An Experiment of Criticism, the mark of a good reader is not someone who reads a book for information, for data. The mark of a good reader is it's many things. One of them is someone who rereads the same thing, okay? The other is that it is a person who reads something and lets what he or she is reading work on him or her according to what the text means and says. What do I mean by that? Think of this play not as being a book in front of you. Think of this play as Aeschylus sitting beside you and saying, let me tell you a story. And a good reader lets the author tell the story the author has told and doesn't look at the story and say, yeah, but why doesn't it have? Or, yeah, but it should have. Or, but what about? Or, but in my 21st century mindset, women weren't chattel. Women aren't chattel. Women have a voice. Why don't women have a voice? Why is there slavery? There's not slavery today. There should be, right? Those are all questions Lewis would say, essentially, are not appropriate questions for a good reader. A good reader lets the work kind of flow over you like a nice, gentle rain shower, and lets the author try to get his or her meaning into you so that you ingest what it's here. It doesn't mean you accept all the ideas. That is, it doesn't mean you read this and go, Well, I kind of like that, those ideas from 5th century Greece. I think all women should be silent. I think all women should be property. I think there should be slavery. No, that's ridiculous. Because even Aeschylus isn't suggesting that. Aeschylus is dealing with the reality of the world that he lived in, just like a playwright today deals with the reality of the world that he or she lives in. And somebody reading a play written today, 300 years from now in the future, will probably go, man, those people were stupid back then. Look at the things they did, said, believed, etc. Okay? There is grace on mortals who so nobly die. We can learn about that grace. We can seek to emulate that grace, I think is what Oedipus is really suggesting. That is, maybe there are some things worth dying for. Now notice she's not trying to escape death because she is saying here she can't escape it, right? Page 66. So Cassandra says, I'm going in, line 1312 or so. I'm going in and mourning as I go, 1313. My death and Agamemnon's, let my life be done. Skipping a line or two. Bear witness to me when I die. When falls for me a woman slain, another woman, and when a man dies for this wickedly mated man. Okay? So I'm going to my death, Agamemnon's death. Bear witness to me. She's kind of saying, when another woman dies, think back to this. When another man dies, think back for this. Okay? So, 1323. I call upon the sun in prayer against that ultimate shining when the Avengers strike these monsters down in blood. The Avengers? Now, that can mean literally to Orestes, or it can mean more metaphorically to the Furies, or to the gods, because she said the gods will be the ones who will ultimately do the vengeance. When the Avengers strike these monsters down in blood, that they avenge as well one simple slave who died, a small thing lightly killed. That's herself. She is one simple slave who died, a small thing, lightly killed. Lightly killed, she means like as an afterthought. If you're familiar with the Harry Potter stories, in the 4th novel, when Cedric Diggory is killed, that's that right there. Kill the spare, we hear in that novel. She's saying, I don't need to die. I don't mean anything to these people, but she accepts it, right? So she goes in, and we hear page 67, we hear Agamemnon cry out, I am struck a deadly blow and deep within. And then he struck again, I'm struck again, I'm wounded twice. The chorus is like, what's going on out there or in there? Line 1355, page 67, talking about Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. They purpose to be tyrants here upon our city. The chorus is suggesting Clytemnestra and Aegisthus want to do away with the kingship and be tyrants, okay? And then they say, 1365, death is a softer thing by far than tyranny. Softer thing. I think they're saying a couple of things there. Death is easier than tyranny, and death is to be preferred. So that kind of goes back to, the comment about there's grace on mortals who so nobly die. That dying nobly, let's say for a cause, in Cassandra's case, what's the cause? The cause is truth. What truth? The prophecy. It is true, right? It's not this great high-minded, I'm dying for Jesus or something like that, or I'm dying for Priam or something like that. It's the truth of her prophecy. It's the truth of her prophetic gift. Death is a softer thing by far than tyranny. Look at the line before that, 1364 on page 68. We can never endure that. Better to be killed. Well, what's the thing to be endured? The shaming of the house. It would be better to die than to live and see the house of Atreus shamed by Clytemnestra and Aegisthus. I think it's pretty safe to argue the house of Atreus has already been shamed because of, the family history and such. So Clytemnestra comes out after Cassandra and Agamemnon are dead and says, much have I said before to serve necessity. That is, much have I said before that I was forced to say. I didn't have a will in it, but I will feel no shame now to unsay it all. Now you're going to see the real me. I stand now where I struck him down. The thing is done. So she admits it. In fact, she goes on, 1384, I struck him twice. When he was down, I struck him the third blow. So it took 2 strikes of the knife blade to get, Agamemnon down to his knees. And with that one, she says, in thanks and reverence to Zeus beneath the ground, the prayed for Savior of the dead. She's saying she showed thanks and reverence to Zeus beneath the ground to pray for a Savior of the dead. She's not saying Zeus is beneath the ground. She's saying those beneath the ground pray to Zeus as the Savior of the dead. Does Zeus ever come save the dead? Does he ever bring them back to life? No, he doesn't. Not at all. Okay? But it's kind of ironic that she says that, because Zeus honors the dead. Zeus holds, even though the Greek gods kind of hold human life very lightly, very much as the character Gloucester in Shakespeare's King Lear says, we are as flies to the gods, right? Wanton toys. Zeus still honors the dead. In Zeus' decrees, the dead, first of all, the slain bodies, right, should be treated in a particular way. For example, you don't desecrate the dead. When Achilles pulled Hector's body around and around the racetrack outside Troy, that angered the gods because he wasn't showing proper devotion. Right? It was only when Achilles heard Priam and saw Priam's tears that he allowed Hector's body to receive proper burial. Because in the Greek system, if the body isn't buried properly, if the body's allowed to rot, to be eaten by crows and birds and dogs and such as carrion, then that soul will never have rest. If the body is properly buried, it can have rest. Yeah, it's going to be in Hades. But otherwise, the soul wanders, right? And doesn't have any rest. So she goes on and says, talking about what she has done, page 69, 1393. These being the facts, elders of Argos assembled here, be glad if it be your pleasure. But for me, I glory. That is, she glories in what she's done. And they're like, whoa, we're stunned. You're arrogant? You vaunt, you boast above your Lord? 1401. You try me out as if I were a woman in vain. But my heart is not fluttered as I speak before you. That is, I'm not afraid of you. I have no doubts about what I've done. You know it. You can praise or blame me as you wish. It's all one. That man is Agamemnon, my husband. He is dead. The work of this right hand that struck in strength of righteousness. Notice she's saying, I acted righteously. All the gods are on my side. And she doesn't literally say all the gods are on her side, but that's what she's implying. She's implying, I acted justly. And that is that. And that is that means no more questions, no more comments. Okay? Why does she say she do this? Page 70, top of the second line. He slaughtered at the altar his own child. Vengeance. He got what he had coming. End of that speech. She says, 14:21. But I say to you, go on and threaten me, but know that I am ready. If fairly you can beat me down beneath your hand for you to rule. But if the God grant otherwise, that is, you can try and take the power from me. You can try and overthrow me. But if you don't, there's the saying, if you're going to strike the king, kill the king. Because if you don't kill him, just going to make him angry. But if the God grant otherwise, if the God doesn't grant you the power, you shall be taught too late for sure to keep your place. Now that's a pretty powerful threat. Okay? So the chorus says, 14:29, yet to come is stroke given for stroke, avenging when you are forlorn of friends. You've opened another Greek image. You've opened a Pandora's box. Vengeance will come. And she's like, oh, shut up. 14:32, by my child's justice driven to fulfillment. That is, by justice for my child. Okay? Iphigenia, killed by the king. By her wrath and fury, to whom I sacrifice this man. The hope that walks my chambers is not traced with fear, while yet Aegisthus makes the fire shine in my hearth. My good friend, now as always. I'm not afraid, she's saying, of any of that other stuff. Why? Open some light here. Why? The shield of our defiance, no weak thing, while he, this other, is fallen stained with this woman you behold, plaything of all the golden girls at Ilium. I still have Aegisthus. Aegisthus will protect me. Okay? She's not concerned at all about Orestes. Well, look at the chorus, the bottom of the next page. Page 71. Spirit that kneels on this house and on the two strains of the blood of Tantalus. The two strains, those are the grandchildren of Tantalus. Atreus and his children, Agamemnon and Menelaus, and Thyestes and his children, the two slain children, and Thyestes. In the hands and hearts of women, you steer the strength tearing my heart. Standing above the corpse, obscene as some carrion crow, it sings. He's talking about, the chorus is there talking about what is going on with the light. Is there talking about Clytemnestra reveling in the death of Agamemnon. So she replies, page 72, line 1475. Now have you set the speech of your lips straight, calling by name the spirit thrice glutted that lives in this race. Calling by name, Tantalus. What's the spirit? It's the spirit of revenge. Okay? Spirit of revenge. I mean, Tantalus kills Pelops, tries to serve the gods. The gods realize what's happening. They bring Pelops back. Tantalus gets sent off to Hades as revenge/justice. Atreus kicks out Thyestes. Thyestes seduces Atreus' wife, Atreus tries to get revenge by killing his children and feeding to him. Thyestes utters a curse. Revenge, 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 revenge. Eye for an eye, all the way down. Okay? Clytemnestra says at the end of page 72, line 1500, in the image of this corpse's queen, the old stark avenger of Atreus for his revel of hate struck down this man, last blood for the slaughtered children. She is there saying, one of the reasons Agamemnon was killed was as payment for Agamemnon's, trying to make sure I get this right, cousins, Thyestes' children, because Aegisthus is Agamemnon's cousin. Right? And the chorus says, what man shall testify? Your hands are clean of this murder. That is, who is going to say that you're not guilty? Yet from his father's blood might swarm some fiend to assist you. Now, that's the chorus going, what about Orestes? I mean, here you are talking about vengeance. Here you are talking about revenge. How do you know Orestes isn't going to come back for revenge? Okay? And she says, talking about Agamemnon, 1523 or so, page 73. And did he not, first of all in this house, wreak death by treachery? That is, didn't Agamemnon have this coming? The flower of this man's love and mine, flower theirs, the firstborn, Iphigenia of the many tears. He dealt with her even as he has suffered now. He killed her as I killed him. With the sword he struck, with the sword he paid for his own act. I mean, that's about as eye for an eye as you can get. And then she goes on the next page, skipping down to the bottom of the speech, page 74. It must be Iphigenia, his child. Who else shall greet her father by the whirling stream and the fury of tears to close him in her arms and kiss him? Because the chorus says, aren't you afraid that when Agamemnon goes down to Hades, he's going to speak to people there and tell them what you've done? He's going to cry out to Zeus, the savior of the dead? And she says, you know who's going to meet him? The child he killed. The implication is that's going to shut him up pretty fast. Chorus, 1565. Then who shall tear the curse from their blood? The house is glued to ruin. Who shall tear the curse from their blood? Who will remove the curse? Who will purify the blood? The chorus is saying this house is damned. No matter how long it continues, this curse will be revisited generation to generation to generation. So notice what is being brought up towards the end of the play. How can the house of Atreus be purified? How can trying to get better light here. How can the family of Atreus ever live in, how do I want to put it? A blessed existence, let's say, right? So Aegisthus then comes in. And he gives this high and mighty speech. So Aegisthus comes in and he gives this, this high and mighty speech, talks about his father, talks about, his brothers and such, and Atreus. And the chorus essentially challenges him, calls him weak and such. Aegisthus replies, page 76, line 16, 19 and following. You are old men. Well, you shall learn how hard it is at your age to be taught how to behave yourselves. In other words, you guys had better be quiet. You're old, I'm young. You don't know what's going to happen, okay, if you continue down this path. So the chorus says, oh, so then you, like a woman, waited the war out here in the house. Wow. So they've just accused him of being effeminate, shaming the master's bed with lust, and you planned all this? And he says, you know, you're going to suffer. It is just such words as these will make you cry in pain. So they go back and forth, and the chorus again calls him a coward. Line 1643, why then, you coward, could you not have slain your man yourself? In other words, Clytemnestra had to do it. You weren't even man enough to take him out yourself. Why must it be his wife who killed, to curse the country and the gods within the ground? Oh, can Orestes live, be somewhere in sunlight still? That's the chorus calling out. Please, gods, let Orestes be alive, all right? So the play ends essentially with the chorus calling on Orestes, not literally, but, you know, please let Orestes still be alive and to come bring vengeance. And they say page 78, bottom of 78, Aeschylus says, I shall not forget this. In the days to come, I shall be there. That is, you're going to live to suffer for the words you have said. Top of 79, chorus leader. Nevermore, if God's guiding hand brings Orestes home again. No, you won't be there. Aeschylus. Exiles feed on empty dreams of hope. I know it. I was one. Now, notice the illogic of his statement. Exiles feed on empty dreams of hope, he says. I know it. I was one. He's saying, I had empty dreams of hope. Why? Because he was exiled. And yet, he now has what he wants, right? So how is it an empty dream? Chorus leader, have your way. Gorge, that is, eat, devour everything. Just stuff yourself, not with food, power, the trappings of authority, Clytemnestra, sex, you know, the whole 9 yards, and grow fat. Soil justice. Soil justice. Shit on justice. Make justice dirty while the power is yours. In other words, you do all that kind of stuff, and what's going to happen? You will just be heaping more and more and more and more upon you. Aeschylus, oh, you're going to pay for that. Crow and strut brave, cockerel by your hen, you have no threats to fear. And Clytemnestra says, don't listen to their yappings. Come now, dearest, you and I have the power. We too shall bring good order to our house at least. And the play ends. Now, notice the end. Is there hope? You know, well, define hope. I mean, the tragedy is Agamemnon does die. He dies unrighteously, so to speak. Do we see Orestes coming? Nope. Has there been any indication that Orestes will come back? Nope. It's kind of a pipe dream. Is there prophecy, so to speak, by Cassandra? Yeah, kind of. Right? But it ends with what? It ends with might making right. It ends with Clytemnestra and Aeschylus on the top of the food chain, having all the power, and they're threatening all the people. They're saying, we will rule, and you're going to pay for challenging us. And the play ends there, and that's where we will stop. I will do another lecture, probably over libation bearers and Eumenides, and post that probably sometime before class, sometime this week. We do not have class on Monday, September 7th, because that is Labor Day.